The sun hung low over sagebrush, a small farming village cradled in a valley of dust and dreams, its fields struggling under the weight of a dry summer in 1879. Jonah Reed stood at the edge of his farm, his hands calloused from years of plowing, his gray eyes scanning the rows of wilting corn. At 40, he was a man shaped by loss. His wife, Eliza, taken by fever 2 years prior, leaving him to raise their teenage son, Caleb, alone. The farm was their lifeline, a patchwork of hope stitched together with sweat, but it was barely enough to keep them fed. Jonah's broad shoulders carried more than the weight of a plow. They bore the grief of a life he could no longer reclaim. Sagebrush was a stubborn place, its wooden houses weathered by wind and time, its people bound by the land they tilled. But a shadow loomed over the valley. Silas Dre, a cattle baron whose sprawling ranch choked the life from smaller homesteads. Dre's wealth was built on greed, his hired guns bullying farmers into selling cheap or facing ruin. Jonah had defied Dre's offers, his pride rooted in a promise to Eliza to keep their home. Today, though, a different fight called him to the village square. Caleb, 16 and lanky, ran from the barn, his face flushed with urgency. "Pa, they're holding a trial at the courthouse. A Navajo girl says she stole from Mercer's store. Folks are riled up." Jonah's jaw tightened. He'd heard of Judge Harlan, a man whose gavel served Dre's purse more than justice. "Stay here, Caleb," he said, grabbing his weathered hat. "Tend the horses." Caleb's eyes flashed with rebellion, his mother's fire burning in them. "I'm comin', Pa. I ain't a kid no more." Jonah sighed, seeing Eliza's stubborn spirit in his son. "Fine, but keep quiet." The courthouse was a squat building of warped wood, its interior stifling with the heat of bodies packed tight. Jonah pushed through the crowd, Caleb at his side, their boots thudding on the creaking floorboards. The air smelled of sweat and tobacco, the townsfolk's murmurs thick with anger. At the front, behind a scarred wooden bench, sat Judge Harlan, his jowls quivering as he adjusted his spectacles. Before him stood a Navajo girl, no older than 15, her dark hair braided tightly, her eyes steady despite the chains on her wrists. Her name, Jonah overheard, was Sani. Mercer, the storekeeper, stood red-faced, pointing at Sani. "She stole a sack of flour, caught her red-handed behind my counter." Sani's voice was calm, her English clear but accented. "I took nothing. I was trading beads for bread, as my father taught me." The crowd jeered, their prejudice louder than her words. Jonah's gut twisted. He'd seen Mercer overcharge Navajo traders before, his scales tipped as crookedly as his smile. He glanced at Caleb, whose fists were clenched, his young face torn between outrage and caution. Judge Harlan banged his gavel, silencing the room. "Enough. The evidence is clear. Sani of the Navajo, you're guilty of theft. Sentence is 3 years in the territorial jail." The words hit Jonah like a blow. 3 years for a girl who'd likely taken nothing? He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "That ain't justice, Harlan. Where's your proof?" The crowd gasped, heads turning. Harlan's eyes narrowed, his face reddening. "Jonah Reed, you're out of line. This court don't need your opinion." "I was at Mercer's yesterday," Jonah said, his voice steady but firm. "Saw Sani trading beads, just like she said." Mercer turned her away, cussing her out. No flour changed hands. Mercer sputtered, but Jonah held his gaze unyielding. He thought of Eliza, her kindness to strangers, her belief in doing right no matter the cost. He couldn't stay silent, not when the truth was so plain. A man in a tailored coat stood from the back. Silas Dre, his gray hair slicked under a wide-brimmed hat, his eyes cold as a snake's. "Careful, Reed," he drawled. "Defyin' this court's dangerous. Might cost you that farm of yours." The threat hung heavy, but Jonah didn't flinch. "I ain't afraid of you, Dre, or your bought judge," the crowd murmured, some with fear, others with a spark of defiance. Sani's eyes met Jonah's, her gratitude silent but fierce. Harlan banged his gavel again, his voice shrill. "Order, Reed, you're in contempt. One more word, and you're locked up with her." Caleb grabbed Jonah's arm, whispering, "Pa, don't. They'll come for us." Jonah shook him off gently, his resolve ironclad. "I saw what I saw, Harlan. You lock her up, you're locking up the truth." A Navajo man, broad-shouldered with gray-streaked hair, stood from the crowd. Sani's father, Tahoma, his presence commanding despite his worn clothes. "This man speaks true," he said, his voice deep. "My daughter is no thief. Let her go." Harlan hesitated, his eyes darting to Dre, who gave a slight shake of his head. But the crowd's mood was shifting, Jonah's words kindling their doubts. A woman, a farmer's wife, spoke up. Jonah's honest. If he says the girl's innocent, I believe him. Others nodded, their voices rising. Harlan's face twisted, but he couldn't ignore the tide. Fine, he snapped. Case dismissed. Sani, you're free, but don't cross me again. The chains were removed, and Sani rubbed her wrists, her eyes still locked on Jonah's round. Tahoma approached, his hand extended. You have our thanks, Jonah Reed. The Navajo do not forget. Jonah clasped his hand, the grip strong and sure. Didn't have a choice, he said, his voice low. Right's right, but as they left the courthouse, Dre's voice followed, cold and sharp. You've made an enemy today, Reed. Sagebrush won't protect you. Jonah didn't turn, but his heart sank. He knew Dre's power. His men could burn fields, steal livestock, or worse. Caleb walked beside him, his face pale, but proud. You did good, Pa, he said. Ma would have been proud. Jonah managed a smile, though worry gnawed at him. Hope so, son. Hope so. That night, as they returned to their farm, Jonah saw smoke on the horizon, not from sagebrush, but from the direction of the Navajo camp. His gut told him Dre was already moving, his vengeance swift. Caleb saddled their horses, his young face set with determination. We gotta warn 'em, Pa. They helped us today. Jonah nodded, his hand on the rifle at his side. He thought of Eliza, her gentle strength, and of Sani's steady gaze in the courtroom. He'd stood for justice once today, and he'd do it again. But as they rode toward the Navajo camp, the distant crack of gunfire told him the cost was coming. Dre's men were circling, and sagebrush was in their sights. The night air hung heavy over sagebrush, thick with the scent of dust and the faint tang of smoke from the distant Navajo camp. Jonah Reed stood on his porch, his calloused hands gripping the railing, his gray eyes fixed on the horizon where the glow of fire flickered like a warning. The trial in the courthouse had shifted something in the valley, an unspoken line drawn between those who bowed to Silas Dre's greed and those who dared to stand against it. Jonah's defiance had freed Sani, the Navajo girl, but it had also painted a target on his back. He felt it in the silence of the night, in the way the wind seemed to carry Dre's threat. Sagebrush won't protect you. Inside the cabin, Caleb sat by the hearth, sharpening a knife with a steady hand, his young face hardened beyond his 16 years. The firelight cast shadows on his features, so like Eliza's sharp cheekbones, a spark of stubborn resolve. Pa, he said, not looking up, you think Dre's men'll come tonight? Jonah's jaw tightened. Not tonight, son. They'll wait. Plan something worse. Dre don't rush when he can save her. Caleb's knife paused. You did right by that girl. Ma would have done the same. Jonah managed a faint smile, though his heart ached at the mention of Eliza. Her kindness had been his anchor, her faith in doing right a compass he still followed. Maybe, he said, but right don't always keep you safe. The morning brought proof of Dre's wrath. Jonah stepped into his fields to find his corn trampled. The stalks snapped like brittle bones, the earth scarred by hoofprints. A message was carved into a fence post, sell or burn. His blood ran cold, but anger burned hotter. He thought of Sani, her steady gaze in the courtroom, and of Tahoma, her father, whose handshake had carried the weight of honor. Jonah had stood for them, and now his farm, his and Caleb's future, was paying the price. Caleb joined him, his face pale but fierce. We can't let him win, Pa. We fight. Jonah placed a hand on his son's shoulder, pride warring with fear. We will, Caleb. But smart. Dre's got men, guns, and no conscience. As they repaired what they could, hoofbeats echoed from the trail. Jonah grabbed his rifle, motioning Caleb to stay low. But the rider was no hired gun. Tahoma, the Navajo man from the courthouse, dismounted, his broad frame steady despite the weariness in his eyes. He carried a leather pouch, and his presence seemed to quiet the restless wind. Jonah Reed, Tahoma said, his voice deep and resonant. You gave my daughter her freedom. The Navajo owe you a debt. Jonah lowered his rifle, uneasy with gratitude. Did what was right, Tahoma. No debt needed. Tahoma's eyes softened, but he pressed the pouch into Jonah's hands. A token, he said, from my people. Inside was a carved eagle feather, its lines intricate, its wood polished to a gleam. Jonah turned it over, feeling its weight, a symbol of trust he hadn't sought. Thank you, he said, his voice rough. But Dre's men hit my fields. They'll come for you next. Tahoma's face darkened. They already have. One of our scouts was attacked last night. Left for dead. Dre wants our land. Same as yours. Jonah's grip on the feather tightened. He thought of Eliza, her voice urging him to help others, even when it cost him. Then, we stand together, he said. Warn Sagebrush. Dre's planning a raid. I'd bet my life on it. Tahoma nodded, his eyes sharp with resolve. Come to our camp. We will plan. Caleb stepped forward, his knife still in hand. I'm going too, Pa. I ain't sitting this out. Jonah hesitated, seeing the boy's determination but fearing the danger. You stay close, he said finally. No heroics. They rode out at dusk, Jonah and Caleb on their horses, Tahoma leading the way to the Navajo camp nestled in a canyon 10 miles north. The trail was treacherous, winding through rocky gullies and past dry creek beds, the air thick with the threat of ambush. Jonah's rifle rested across his saddle, his senses sharp, while Caleb's eyes darted to every shadow. Tahoma rode with a quiet strength, his spear a silent promise of protection. The Navajo camp was a cluster of hogans and tents, their shapes soft against the canyon's red walls. Fires glowed, casting light on faces marked by hardship but lit with resilience. Sani ran to Tahoma, her braids swinging, her smile bright as she saw Jonah. You came, she said, her voice warm. Thank you for the courthouse. Jonah tipped his hat, awkward under her gratitude. Just spoke the truth, Sani. A council gathered by the largest fire, Navajo elders and warriors listening as Tahoma recounted the attack on their scout. Jonah spoke of his ruined fields, of Dre's threat to Sagebrush. The elders murmured, their voices a mix of anger and caution. An older woman, her hair streaked with silver, spoke, This Dre takes our land, our water. Now he threatens your village. We fight as one, or we fall alone. Jonah nodded, the eagle feather heavy in his pocket. Sagebrush ain't much, but it's home. We'll arm the village, set defenses. If you stand with us, we'll stand with you. The council agreed, their resolve a spark in the dark. Sani brought Jonah a bowl of stew, its warmth a small comfort against the chill. My mother made this, she said, before she passed. It's how we thank friends. Jonah ate, the simple act binding him to these people in a way he hadn't expected. He thought of Eliza, her kindness mirrored in Sani's gesture, and felt a pang of hope, a fragile thing, but real. Back in Sagebrush, Jonah and Caleb rallied the villagers. The blacksmith sharpened pitchforks, the school teacher organized lookouts, and the farmers fortified their homes with barrels and planks. Tahoma and a few Navajo warriors joined them, their presence drawing wary glances but growing respect. Jonah worked late, nailing shutters and checking his rifle, his mind on Caleb's safety and the debt he owed the Navajo. As night fell, a scout returned, his face grim. Dre's men are coming, he said. Tomorrow, at dawn. They mean to burn Sagebrush to the ground. Jonah's heart sank, but he looked at Caleb, at Tahoma, at the villagers preparing to fight. The eagle feather in his pocket was a reminder of the stand he'd taken, the truth he'd spoken. Dre's men were coming, but so was a reckoning. Sagebrush would stand, and the Navajo would stand with it. The desert stretched before Jonah Reed like a sea of fire, its sands glowing red under the merciless sun of 1,879. His horse, Grit, plodded through the soft dunes, each step kicking up clouds of dust that clung to Jonah's weathered face. At his side rode Tahoma, the Navajo warrior, his spear strapped across his back, his dark eyes scanning the horizon with the precision of a hawk. Behind them, Caleb, Jonah's 16-year-old son, gripped the reins of his mare, his young face set with a determination that both swelled and broke Jonah's heart. The eagle feather Tahoma had given him rested in Jonah's pocket, its weight a reminder of the stand he'd taken for Sani, and the cost that now pursued them. They were 10 miles from Sagebrush, tracking Silas Dre's men through the canyons that scarred the valley. The scout's warning had been clear. Dre's hired guns were planning to burn the village at dawn, a punishment for Jonah's defiance in the courthouse and the Navajos' refusal to cede their land. Jonah, Tahoma, and Caleb had set out to scout the enemy's numbers, hoping to give Sagebrush a fighting chance. But the desert was a cruel ally, its heat and silence testing their strength as much as Dre's men would. The trail wound through a maze of red rock and brittle scrub, the air thick with the scent of baked earth. Jonah's canteen was half empty, its water warm and metallic. He glanced at Caleb, whose face was flushed, his hat pulled low to shield his eyes. "Stay sharp, son," Jonah said, his voice low but firm. "This ain't a game." Caleb nodded, his jaw tight. "I know, Pa. I'm ready." Tahoma's voice broke the silence, steady and calm. "The desert tests us all, young one. It shows who we are when the world strips us bare." Jonah met Tahoma's gaze, seeing the wisdom of a man who'd faced loss as deep as his own. Eliza's death had left Jonah hollow, but Caleb's courage and Tahoma's trust stirred something in him, a spark of purpose he thought long extinguished. By noon, the heat was a living thing, clawing at their skin and blurring their vision. Grit stumbled on a loose rock, and Jonah dismounted to check her hooves, his hands steady despite the ache in his bones. Tahoma pointed to a narrow canyon ahead, its walls casting long shadows. "Dre's men use these passes," he said. "We'll find tracks there, but we must be silent." Caleb's eyes widened, his hand drifting to the knife at his belt. "What if they're waitin'? Then we fight," Jonah said, his rifle a familiar weight across his saddle. "But we don't go looking for blood." The canyon was a choke point, its walls closing in until the sky was a thin blue slit above. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the soft clink of Grit's shoes on stone. Jonah's senses were taut, every shadow a potential threat. Tahoma led, his spear now in hand, his steps light as a coyote's effort. Caleb followed close, his mare nervous but obedient. Jonah's heart pounded, not just for the danger, but for his son, too young to face a fight like this. A sudden crack split the air, a rifle shot, echoing off the canyon walls. Jonah dove for cover behind a boulder, pulling Caleb down with him. Tahoma crouched low, his spear raised, his eyes scanning the cliffs above. 3 of Dre's men appeared, their rifles glinting, their laughter harsh. "Reed," one shouted, his voice thick with malice. "You should have sold when you had the chance." Jonah fired, his bullet grazing a gunman's shoulder, sending him scrambling. Tahoma hurled his spear, catching another in the leg, pinning him to the ground. But the third man was faster, his shot striking Caleb's arm, blood blooming on his sleeve. Caleb cried out, dropping his knife, and Jonah's world narrowed to his son's pain. "Caleb!" Jonah roared, tackling the shooter, his fists driving into the man's face until he went limp. He turned to Caleb, who clutched his arm, his face pale but defiant. "I'm okay, Pa," he gasped. "Just a graze." Tahoma retrieved his spear, his expression grim. "We must move. More will come." Jonah tore his bandana, binding Caleb's wound, his hands shaking with fear and fury. "You stay behind me," he said, his voice hoarse. "No arguments." Caleb nodded, his eyes bright with pain but unyielding. They pushed deeper into the canyon, Tahoma leading them to a hidden crevice where they could rest. The air was cooler here, the shadows a brief mercy. Jonah checked Caleb's wound, relieved to see it shallow, but guilt gnawed at him. He'd brought his son into this, just as he'd brought danger to Sagebrush. Tahoma knelt beside them, offering a strip of dried meat. "Your son is brave," he said, "like my Sani. She faced the courtroom alone, but you gave her strength." Jonah shook his head, his voice low. "I lost my wife to fever. Can't lose him too." Tahoma's eyes softened, his hand resting on Jonah's shoulder. "I lost my wife to sickness, same as you. Sani is all I have. When you spoke for her, you gave me back my heart. Let me help you keep yours." The words struck Jonah, a bridge across their shared grief. He thought of the eagle feather, its promise of trust, and felt a bond forming, a bond not just of necessity, but of understanding. "What's Dre plannin'?" he asked, his voice steadying. Tahoma's face darkened. "He means to burn Sagebrush, drive you out, then take our lands when no one's left to fight. His men are camped a mile east, near the old silver mine. 20, maybe more." Jonah's heart sank, but Caleb's voice cut through, fierce despite his pain. "We can warn the village, Pa. Get the Navajo to help. We ain't alone." Jonah looked at his son, pride mingling with fear. He nodded to Tahoma. "Let's get to your camp. We'll rally your warriors." They rode hard, the canyon giving way to open plains, the sun sinking into a blood-red horizon. The Navajo camp was alive with activity, warriors sharpening spears, elders chanting prayers. Sani ran to them, her eyes wide with worry as she saw Caleb's wound. "You're hurt," she said, fetching a healer who dressed the injury with herbs and cloth. Tahoma gathered the council, Jonah at his side, recounting Dre's plan. The elders listened, their faces grim but resolute. "We will fight with sagebrush," an elder said. "Your truth saves Sani. Our strength will save your home." As night fell, Jonah sat by a fire, Caleb resting beside him, the eagle feather in his hand. The desert had tested them, but so had their hearts, and they'd emerged stronger. Dre's men were coming, but so were the Navajo. Sagebrush would stand, and Jonah would fight not just for his son, but for the justice he'd sworn to uphold. The dawn broke over Sagebrush with a blood-red glow, the sky a warning of the storm to come. Jonah Reed stood at the edge of the village, his rifle cradled in his calloused hands, his gray eyes scanning the horizon where dust clouds rose like specters. The air was thick with the scent of dry earth and impending violence, the silence broken only by the creak of shutters and the low murmurs of villagers preparing for battle. Beside him, Tahoma, the Navajo warrior, sharpened his spear, his face carved with resolve. Caleb, Jonah's 16-year-old son, stood nearby, his arm bandaged from the canyon skirmish, his young face set with a courage that both swelled and terrified Jonah's heart. The eagle feather in Jonah's pocket, a gift from Tahoma, was a quiet reminder of the oath he'd taken to stand for justice, no matter the cost. The scout's warning had come true. Silas Dre's men were riding for Sagebrush, their intent to burn the village and break its spirit. Jonah had rallied the farmers, the blacksmith, the schoolteacher, arming them with pitchforks, rifles, and raw determination. The Navajo warriors, led by Tahoma, had joined them, their spears and bows a silent promise of alliance. Sagebrush was a small place, its fields modest, its people stubborn, but today it stood as one with the Navajo, bound by Jonah's defiance in the courthouse and the shared threat of Dre's greed. "They're comin'," Tahoma said, his voice low, pointing to the dust clouds growing closer. 20 men, maybe more. They'll hit the north fields first. Jonah nodded, his jaw tight. "We hold the line here. Protect the homes, the barns. No surrender." Caleb gripped his knife, his eyes fierce despite the pain in his arm. "We'll make 'em pay, Pa." Jonah placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his voice soft but firm. "Stay behind cover, Caleb. I can't lose you." The first shots rang out as Dre's men charged, their horses thundering across the plains, their torches blazing. Flames licked the northern fields, Jonah's corn catching fire, the smoke rising like a funeral pyre. The villagers opened fire, their rifles cracking, while the Navajo warriors loosed arrows with deadly precision. Jonah aimed his rifle, dropping a rider before he could hurl another torch. Tahoma's spear flew, pinning a gunman to the ground, his cry lost in the chaos. "Sagebrush stands," Jonah shouted, his voice rallying the defenders. The farmers fought with a ferocity born of desperation, their homes and lives at stake. The Navajo warriors moved like shadows, their arrows and spears cutting through Dre's men. But the enemy was relentless, their numbers overwhelming, their torches setting barns and fences alight. Jonah dove behind a wagon, pulling Caleb with him as bullets splintered the wood. Tahoma joined them, his face streaked with sweat and blood from a shallow cut. "They're aimin' for the square," he said. "If they take it, the village falls." Jonah's heart pounded, the smoke stinging his eyes. He thought of Eliza, her gentle strength, and of Sani, the girl he'd saved from an unjust trial. This fight was for them, for Caleb, for Sagebrush. "We push back," he said. "Take the fight to Dre." They moved through the chaos, Jonah firing as he ran, Tahoma's spear a blur beside him. Caleb stayed close, his knife ready, his young face pale but unyielding. The village square was a battlefield, flames licking the schoolhouse, villagers and Navajo fighting side by side. Jonah saw Sani among them, her bow steady as she loosed an arrow, her eyes fierce with the same courage she'd shown in the courthouse. Then, a figure emerged through the smoke. Silas Dre, astride a black stallion, his tailored coat pristine despite the chaos. His cold eyes locked on Jonah, a sneer twisting his face. "You should have stayed quiet, Reed," he shouted, drawing a revolver. "This village burns because of you." Jonah raised his rifle, but a bullet grazed his shoulder, pain flaring hot and sharp. He stumbled, Caleb catching him, his son's voice desperate. "Pa, I'm fine," Jonah growled, steadying himself. He faced Dre, his voice cutting through the din. "You framed Sani, bribed Harlan, all to steal Navajo land. Now you're burning my home." "Why?" Dre laughed, his revolver steady. "Power, Reed. The Navajo land's rich with water, and sagebrush is in my way. You and your kind are nothing but dust." The words were a blade, confirming Jonah's fears. Dre's greed had orchestrated Sani's trial, the attacks on the Navajo, the ruin of his fields. Rage surged, his finger tightening on the trigger, ready to end Dre's tyranny. But Tahoma's voice broke through, calm and steady. "Jonah, he wants your soul. Don't give it to him." Jonah's hand shook, Eliza's memory anchoring him. He saw Caleb's worried eyes, Sani's determined face, the villagers fighting for their homes. Killing Dre would be easy, but it wouldn't rebuild sagebrush. "Drop the gun, Dre," he said, his voice low. "You face the law, not me." Dre snarled, firing, but Tahoma tackled him from his horse, the bullet missing Jonah by inches. The Navajo warrior bound Dre's hands, his strength unyielding. The tide turned as the villagers and Navajo overwhelmed the remaining gunmen, their torches extinguished, their rifles silenced. The fires still burned, but sagebrush stood, its heart unbroken. Jonah knelt beside Caleb, checking his son's wound, relief flooding him as he saw it unchanged. Sani approached, her bow slung across her back, her eyes bright with gratitude. "You fought for us," she said. "Now we fight for you." Tahoma dragged Dre to his feet, the Baron's face twisted with defeat. "Take him to the sheriff," Jonah said. "Let the law deal with him." The Navajo warriors helped douse the flames, the villagers working beside them, their differences forgotten in the heat of battle. Caleb stood tall, his knife sheathed, his pride evident. Jonah looked at the smoldering fields, the damaged barns, and felt the eagle feather in his pocket. The cost of truth had been high, but sagebrush had held, and the Navajo had stood with them. The fight was won, but the scars remained, and Jonah knew the valley's healing was just beginning. The dawn light crept over sagebrush, soft and golden, casting long shadows across the scorched fields and battered homes. The air still carried the faint sting of smoke, a reminder of the battle that had raged hours before, but the village stood unbroken, its spirit kindled by defiance and unity. Jonah Reed leaned against his porch railing, his broad shoulders weary, his gray eyes tracing the horizon where the desert met the sky. His rifle rested inside, its work done for now, but the eagle feather in his pocket, Tahoma's gift, felt heavier than ever, a symbol of the bond forged through fire and blood. Silas Dre was behind bars, his men scattered or captured, but the scars of their greed lingered in the burned barns and trampled crops. Inside the cabin, Caleb slept, his bandaged arm a testament to his courage, his young face peaceful despite the pain. Jonah's heart ached with pride and fear. He'd nearly lost his son, just as he'd lost Eliza. But sagebrush had held, and the Navajo had stood with them, their warriors' spears and arrows turning the tide. The village square buzzed with activity. Farmers and Navajo working side by side to douse the last embers and salvage what remained. Jonah felt the weight of their victory, but also the challenge ahead, rebuilding a village, healing a valley, mending his own broken heart. Tahoma approached, his broad frame steady despite the cut on his cheek, his spear now a staff to lean on. "You fought well, Jonah Reed," he said, his voice deep and warm. "Sagebrush is stronger for it." Jonah shook his head, his voice rough. "We'd have lost without your people. I brought this fight to you, and you paid in blood." Tahoma's eyes softened, a smile touching his lips. "You stood for Sani when no one else would. That was the first battle won. We are even." Jonah clasped his hand, the grip a silent vow. He thought of Eliza, her kindness mirrored in his stand for Sani, and felt a flicker of peace, a sense that she'd be proud. "What now?" he asked. "Dre's gone, but the land's hurt. So are we." Tahoma gestured to the square, where Sani helped a farmer's wife stack salvaged timber. "We rebuild," he said. "Together. The Navajo know the desert's ways. We will share them." The days that followed were a testament to that promise. The Navajo returned to sagebrush, bringing tools, seeds, and knowledge of irrigation from their canyon springs. Farmers, once wary of the tribe, worked alongside them, learning to channel water to parched fields. Jonah and Caleb joined the effort, their hands blistered from digging trenches and repairing barns. The village began to heal, its wounds bandaged by sweat and solidarity. Sani was a constant presence, her laughter bright as she carried water or braided ropes, her spirit a bridge between two peoples. One afternoon, as Jonah hammered a new fence post, Sani approached, her dark braids swinging, a new eagle feather in her hand. Its carvings were finer than the first, etched with symbols of strength and unity. "For you," she said, her voice steady, "for saving me, and for saving Sagebrush." Jonah took the feather, its weight grounding him. He thought of Caleb's courage, Tahoma's trust, the villagers' defiance. "This ain't just for me," he said, his voice thick. "It's for all of us." Sani smiled, her eyes bright. "My father says you're family now. The Navajo don't forget." The words struck Jonah, stirring memories of Eliza's warmth, her dream of a home filled with love. He'd thought that dream dead, buried with her, but Sagebrush and the Navajo had given it new life. He tucked the feather beside the first, their twin weights a promise to protect, to rebuild, to belong. Caleb, now stronger, joined them, his arm healing under the Navajo healer's care. "Pa," he said, his voice steady, "I want to learn from Tahoma, how to fight, how to live like they do. I want to protect this place." Jonah's chest tightened, pride mingling with the fear of a father. "You're already protecting it, son," he said. "But learn." The village gathered that evening for a festival, a celebration of survival. Navajo drums echoed, their rhythm blending with the farmers' fiddles, a song of unity rising under the stars. Tahoma's warriors shared venison, the villagers offered fresh-baked bread, and children, Navajo and settler alike, ran laughing through the square. Jonah stood at the edge, watching Caleb dance with Sani, their youth a spark of hope. Tahoma joined him, his spear planted in the earth like a sentinel. "You've given us more than justice," Tahoma said. "You've given us a future." Jonah looked at the rebuilt barns, the new irrigation ditches, the faces lit by firelight. "You gave me one too," he said. "I was lost after Eliza. Now I'm found." The festival stretched into the night, the valley alive with music and laughter. Jonah thought of the courthouse, of Sani's chains, of Dre's cold eyes. The truth had cost him his fields, his peace, nearly his son, but it had also given him something greater, a community, a purpose, a family beyond blood. Sagebrush was no longer just a village. It was a home, bound to the Navajo by shared struggle and trust. As the stars burned bright, Jonah planted a new row of corn, the seeds a gift from the Navajo, the soil enriched by their water. Caleb worked beside him, Sani nearby, her laughter a melody that drowned out the ghosts of his past. The eagle feathers in his pocket were a vow to stand for justice, to protect those he loved, to let hope rise like a bird in flight. Sagebrush would grow, and so would he, carried on the wings of an eagle's flight.